When the year 2020 arrived, the global economy had just completed its 10th consecutive year of expansion, a trend that most economists and government finance officials said would last for years. However, as the new virus was detected and started spreading worldwide, those same expectations were shattered, and the worst global recession in years was triggered. The global economy has shrunk by 4.4% in 2020 compared to 0.1% in 2009, which was the last global financial crisis. COVID-19 has left the world facing a big economic crisis as the world's GDP decreased. In fact, it's estimated that the GDP declined by 6.7% worldwide, with the US facing a decrease of 4.7%, which shocked the economists worldwide as it was expected that the worldwide GDP would increase. For example, according to the 2021 forecast, the global GDP should have increased by 5.8% when it actually decreased by 2.9%. In addition, the global debt mountain has significantly increased due to the unprecedented amounts of stimulus checks provided by the government to those in need, such as students. As expected, this economic decline affected a lot of sectors and business worldwide. Unemployment rose greatly in most of the countries in the world, as we can see from Figure 2. For example, 22 million people in the US were fired between March and April alone, and the unemployment rate jumped to almost 15%. A lot of important economic sectors were affected by the pandemic. First off, due to the closure of airports and borders, and because of the fuel price increasing, global exports have cratered everywhere. For example, exports in France have decreased by almost 20%. This trend can be seen in most of the first world countries, as the graph depicts. The stock market sector saw substantial losses in the first quarter of 2020, with several stock indices losing more than 20% their values in March 2020. Transportations companies' stocks decreased significantly as they were mostly affected by the pandemic. Another sector that saw big changes in its economy is the tourism sector. In fact, due to the closure of borders, the projected global tourism revenue in 2020 was $396.37 billion US dollars. However, the sector ended up losing $810.7 billion US dollars due to COVID-19, while the global change flight frequency after a year was still negative 43.5%. The effect was also in part to blame the collapse in energy stocks, with the price of product like airline fuel decreasing due to the collapse of demand in 2020. However, not all sectors were negatively affected by the pandemic. Overall, retail websites generated almost 22 billion visits in June 2020, up to 16.7 billion global visits in January 20. Due to many shelters at home orders and a desire to avoid crowded stores in places where it is possible to shop, consumers have turned to the internet to procure everyday items such as groceries or toilet papers. Online retailers such as Amazon and Etsy saw a large increase in their stock prices, along with the companies who provided crucial parts of infrastructure necessary for online shopping, such as PayPal and FedEx. Similarly, computer chips manufacturers NVIDIA and AMD saw returns of 100% or more, likely due both to the shift to remote working necessitated by the pandemic, as well as the global increase in playing video games, resulting from the unavailability of many other activities. In summary, even after the recovery gets underway, the global economy is expected to experience a protracted period of below-trend output and substantial income losses. Global potential growth, the rate at which growth can be sustained at full employment and full capacity utilization, was already slowing prior to pandemic. COVID-19 has accelerated this slowdown for the global economy and emerging market and developing economies alike. As the statistics show, multiple businesses around the world were impacted by COVID-19, causing the economies of all the countries to fall in a recession. Due to the global economic recession, it further caused the unemployment rate to significantly increase as multiple businesses around the world were failing. As a result, the governments of each country implemented new policies to recover and reverse some of the long-term damages. The policies that were imposed at the start of COVID-19 were not so effective in supporting the hardest hit sectors, as the government was in need of protecting the people and the citizens. Hence, policies like closing down the borders and curfew, for example, were very effective in decreasing the number of cases in each country, but it was not so effective in economically supporting the hardest hit sectors. By closing down the border, multiple businesses relating to tourism have failed. However, as time passed and that the country were stabilizing the number of COVID-19 cases, the government imposed a much more effective policies to support the hardest hit sectors. For instance, governments in several countries imposed a policy of reopening up non-essential activities with up to 50% capacity. This would not allow these hard-hit sectors to completely recover from the damage caused by the pandemic, but it did support these hard-hit sectors economically. Moreover, imposing curfews were also effective in certain ways. For example, by imposing curfews, it has allowed businesses like Amazon and Uber Eats to economically grow significantly. On the other hand, it is difficult to claim that the imposing curfew was necessarily effective, as it has led multiple restaurants and non-essential activities that require in-person to fail. In conclusion, policies implemented by the governments were effective in supporting the hardest hit sectors, yet there were still some businesses that were not supported, as it is difficult to help all the business at once. The COVID-19 pandemic has influenced sectors driven by science, technology, and innovation worldwide. Important segments have been severely hit, such as small and medium-sized enterprises and early-stage startups. These account for 212.98 million businesses worldwide. In Canada alone, 1.23 million employer businesses were affected. Of these, 1.2 million were small businesses, 22,905 were medium-sized, and 2,978 were large businesses. Businesses in this space have incurred a high level of debt during the crisis. In Canada alone, these businesses have added a record of 52.1 billion in credit debt to their balance sheet. Moreover, in the United States, the number of businesses in this space have decreased drastically during this pandemic, from 15 million active businesses at the pre-pandemic times to a low of 8 million active businesses at the pandemic's worst times in March 2020, to then slightly recover back to 13 million business owners. This is due to raw material supply shortages, disrupted chain of operations, and labor and transportation difficulties. In fact, as seen in the graph below, a five-fold increase is witnessed since the early pandemic days for shipping a 40-feet container from Asia to North America. Science played this key part in the world's recovery. Thanks to the vaccine, people are now able to move more freely as restaurants and borders are reopening. Vaccines helped to lower the severeness of the symptoms of COVID-19, which gave more liberty to go out, travel, and shop. This economically helped small businesses significantly. Thanks to the science, all the tertiary sectors of the economy that have suffered from COVID-19 are now reopening at a full capacity. We can say that without science, we may still be under lockdown and many more businesses would have closed for good. In conclusion, the pandemic has shown the countries were not ready for such a major outbreak. Lots of the tertiary sectors have suffered from COVID-19. In a way, we can say that now countries will be more prepared in the event of an outbreak. The economy was mainly impacted because countries were not ready to handle pandemics. We can imagine that in the event of another outbreak, countries and companies will now be more prepared and the economy will be less impacted.